You take a pill for a headache without even thinking about it. 30 seconds, maybe less. No appointment, no waiting, no fear. Now picture that same headache 50,000 years ago. No bottle, no pharmacy, no one to ask, just you, the pain, and a fire that isn't going to fix anything. Here's the strange part. For almost all of human history, there was no medicine as you know it. Not a single hospital, not one vaccine, and somehow people didn't just survive that. They built the entire foundation of what medicine would eventually become. So how did they do it? Go back nearly 2 million years, long before anyone could speak in full sentences, and you find the first instinct. Rest, stay warm, avoid food when sick, lick the wound. These aren't clever ideas. They're default settings, the same ones you can watch in an injured dog today. But somewhere in that timeline, something changed. Something that no other animal does with real consistency. Early humans started choosing plants on purpose. You know this because chimpanzees still do it. Researchers have watched sick chimps seek out specific bitter leaves they normally avoid, plants that physically scrape parasites from the gut, plants with almost no nutritional value at all. They're not eating for taste. They're self-medicating, and if a chimp can do that alone, imagine what a human could do with something a chimp doesn't have. Language. The ability to tell someone else what worked. That single shift changes everything. An animal that feels better after eating a certain root has a private discovery. A human who feels better and then tells the next person has started a tradition. One good observation, shared once, could ripple through 100 lives across 100 years. That quiet chain of shared knowledge is where medicine actually begins. Not in a laboratory, around a fire. Now, here's something that should stop you cold. In a cave in Borneo, archaeologists uncovered a skeleton roughly 31,000 years old, missing part of one leg. Not lost, removed. The bone had healed and reshaped itself around the cut, which means the amputation was deliberate. And the patient lived for years afterward. Before farming, before writing, before anything you'd call civilization, someone performed surgery, and it worked. This wasn't an isolated miracle either. Across the world, researchers have found ancient skulls with neat, careful holes cut into them, a practice called trepanation, likely used to relieve pressure or treat seizures. Many of those patients survived too, because the bone had time to grow back. Stone Age brain surgery, with flint tools, and no way to explain why it worked. So how did anyone learn to do that safely? The honest answer is trial, failure, and the slow accumulation of what didn't kill the patient. Neanderthals were doing something similar even earlier. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found traces of medicinal plants tied to burial sites roughly 60,000 years old, and dental analysis on Neanderthal remains elsewhere has turned up residue from plants still used medicinally today. These weren't modern humans, and they were already treating illness on purpose. By the time ancient Egypt reaches its peak, the knowledge has become almost systematic. The Ebers Papyrus, compiled around 1550 BCE from far older sources, lists over 700 remedies. Honey for wounds, which genuinely works because its chemistry starves bacteria of the moisture they need. Garlic for infection, which really does carry antibacterial properties. Willow bark for pain. The same compound family that later becomes aspirin. Nobody understood the mechanism. They understood the result, and they wrote it down so it wouldn't be lost. Here's the detail that reframes the whole story. Germ theory, the basic idea that invisible organisms cause disease, wasn't proven until the 1860s through the work of scientists like Louis Pasteur. That means every single medical tradition before that point was operating completely blind to the actual cause of infection. The Greeks blamed imbalanced bodily fluids. Traditional Chinese medicine described blocked energy. None of these models were technically correct, and yet some of their treatments worked anyway, because ancient healers weren't really theorists. They were relentless observers, quietly running experiments across centuries and keeping only what helped. Trauma tells the clearest story of all. A broken bone doesn't need a diagnosis. It needs to be held still. Egyptian mummies show splinted fractures. Roman military medicine, built out of pure necessity, produced trained field surgeons who removed arrowheads, closed wounds, and managed infection on the battlefield, techniques that stayed largely unchanged for 1,000 years afterward. Keeping soldiers alive wasn't philosophy. It was strategy. But none of this happened in isolation. Humans are slow, clawless, and defenseless alone. Survival was always a group project. A sick person cared for by others recovered more often than one left alone, and communities that understood this, even without a word for psychology, simply outlived the ones that didn't. Evolution didn't just shape bodies. It shaped the instinct to care for each other. None of this means it was gentle. Maternal mortality in the ancient world often reached 1 to 3% per birth, a risk that compounded every time a woman gave birth again. In many societies, roughly half of all children didn't reach the age of 5. A minor wound could turn fatal within days. A bad fever could become sepsis, and there was almost nothing anyone could do once that happened. This wasn't neglect. It was the ceiling of what was possible without knowing what a bacterium even was. And still, something remarkable was happening in the background the entire time. Traces of mold have been found in ancient Egyptian wound treatments, mold that unknowingly produced compounds close to what would later become penicillin, roughly 2,000 years before Alexander Fleming got the credit. The theory behind it was wrong. The result was real. That thread never actually broke. Quinine used for centuries by South American communities long before it treated malaria worldwide. Artemisinin pulled from a plant used in Chinese medicine for 2,000 years before becoming one of the most effective malaria treatments alive today. Digoxin from foxglove. Taxol from the Pacific yew. According to the World Health Organization, a large majority of the global population still relies primarily on plant-based medicine right now, not out of tradition alone, but because it works. So the next time you take something as small as a painkiller, you're not just treating a headache. You're standing at the far end of a chain that started with a chimpanzee chewing something bitter it didn't enjoy, continued through a surgeon with a flint blade in a cave 31,000 years ago, and ran through Egyptian healers pressing honey onto a wound they didn't understand but trusted anyway. They did it the hard way, one dangerous experiment at a time. So you never would have to.